Hello, and welcome to another puzzle design episode. The first episode was 10 months ago, and a lot has happened since then. About 6 months ago, Gentoo Rescue released. It has been well received, but then recently it's really picked up in attention, and I'm getting a lot of new players, and yeah, just a lot more attention on the game. So I thought I'd make another episode to, see if there is interest for a series like this. So this episode is about, well, it's more of a continuation of the first episode. The first episode was about how puzzles always come from ideas. Something you want to show the player, something you want to teach the player. This episode is kind of taking that one step further and saying that a puzzle isn't just about the idea that's in the solution. It's also about all of the wrong ideas that players might come up with. And you need to make sure those wrong ideas are handled gracefully. By handled gracefully, I mean that they need to, that players, when they have these wrong ideas, they need some way to reject them on their own. They need to have an idea, they have a wrong idea, they make a few steps, and then they realize it's not going to work because of this reason. And a big part of that is just letting players experiment and discover why their wrong ideas don't work. The worst thing you can do is have a situation where a player has a wrong idea to the puzzle, but they can't really fully experiment it, and it's not clear why. And so the player doesn't fully reject the idea. They end up, tunnel visioning on this idea and then just being stuck with the puzzle for a while. Maybe eventually they abandon the idea, but they kind of abandon it because they just gave up, not because of, any particular reason. And so we want to give reasons for players to abandon those wrong ideas. So with that in mind, let's look at this puzzle. So this is a spring teleporter puzzle. This is in really early in the teleporter world. Actually, not exactly this puzzle. I'll get to that in a moment. By now, I would expect players to be fully familiar with the spring, or at least the spring up until this point, the spring that's required for this puzzle. And then they're still in the process of learning the teleporter. They do know a few things already, though, so I don't have to worry about some of the teleporter details here. So the intended solve path for this puzzle is for players to realize that a spring stops them one tile away from a wall. So essentially, once you hit a wall, the penguin slows down as it goes to the next tile. Now, it doesn't actually slow down the animation or in the move logic, but once it gets to that next tile, it'll stop on its own, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that's kind of a unique property in the game. It's not often that an animal is able to stop on its own. Most animals slide until they hit a wall, right? So with that in mind, if we want red to teleport and land or stop on the teleporter exit, we need to back it into the teleporter. So the setup we want is to have red here, and then, blue at the top left tile here, and then red in between blue and the teleporter, and then the bounce red back into blue. So I'll demonstrate how you would do that. Of course, getting red here is not easy since red has a spring. Red can only reach this tile to the left if it bounces off of blue sitting here. So really the problem is getting blue here. How do we get blue here? It's not so bad. There's a wall this direction, so blue's going to have to come in from the right. So we basically just have to get blue to this row, and then we'll be done. And that takes a few moves. Not so bad to set up, though, once we have that idea. And once blue's there, the puzzle basically solves itself. We get the arrangement we want, and then red can move up into blue, and it'll stop on the teleporter, which is the same thing as stopping on the teleporter destination. And we solve the puzzle. But again, this isn't a full description of the puzzle. We need to also look at all of the ways the player can fail. So the first, most obvious way a player can fail is if they just move left with red, right? This is an early teleporter puzzle, but I expect by now that players will be familiar enough to not be surprised by this. But I still do like it when puzzles have this sort of initial move that would almost work if it wasn't for, just one thing or something. And so in this case, this move would almost work if we had a wall here and red didn't have a spring. So here, I guess in this case, it's actually two things that cause this not to work. Anyway, there's a couple other fail states. Another one is red could be above the teleporter and red could move down. But what will happen with this is red will enter an infinite loop of bouncing, because it continues to move after it teleports, and it enters this infinite loop, and then eventually bounces off into the water. So players will have seen this with the spring before this puzzle, but it's still surprising. You know, I like when we can surprise players with this kind of silly fail state. So I really enjoy the fact that, you know, this is one of the ways you can fail this puzzle. Another way you can fail the puzzle, you know, a reasonable idea players might have is, oh, let's put blue on the destination, and then let's see what happens when we teleport red while blue is already there. And what happens is, well, blue just gets launched off the puzzle, and red continues moving left into the water, so it does not stop. Blue does not cause red to stop. Now, there is another idea that I saw some playtesters come up with. Now, again, this isn't the version in the game. This is a version that was playtested. And playtesters kind of wanted to combine those previous two fail states. A couple of people wanted to put blue on the goal while red was above the teleporter, and then red can come in and teleport while moving vertically. And I guess the thought process there is that maybe the fact that blue is on the goal and there's walls would somehow prevent things from, would somehow prevent red from entering this infinite loop. And so allow it to stop on the tile. That's perfectly reasonable. You know, maybe there is some special interaction there. But I, as the designer, know there isn't. So, of course, this was hard for me to anticipate players coming up with as an idea. And to make it worse, this idea is actually impossible to do. Because in order for red to get above the teleporter, I have to have blue in one of these two tiles. And once blue is in one of these two tiles and red's in one of these two tiles, once red's in one of these two tiles and blue is in the tile of the same row on the right side, blue can no longer teleport while moving down. I mean, blue can teleport while moving left, but then it's not going to stop on the exit. So we can't have the situation where blue is here and red is here. So players that had this idea that didn't realize that it was actually impossible to set up would tunnel vision on this idea and fiddle around for, 2, 3, 5 minutes before eventually just giving up on that idea because they couldn't make it work, or that they couldn't even they couldn't even set it up to see if it would work. And that's not very satisfying. Ideally, you want them to have a reason to abandon an idea. So what do we do about that? Well, add a wall here, and now it works. And this isn't exactly what it looks like in game, but at least now Red can get above the teleporter, and then now blue can teleport in from the left, and then red can come down, and we see that even though blue is there, it's still going to knock blue out and then enter its own infinite loop. So there's no special interaction with this. Now, this isn't the version in the game because I still liked having this missing wall, because when it's fully boxed in like this, then red entering the teleporter horizontally is basically the same as red entering the teleporter vertically. And I wanted to have, sort of a different version of a fail state. So all I did now is just open it up on the right-hand side. That does change one thing. It means now that at the very beginning, if I move left, red will no longer just go straight into the water, because now there's a wall there. It'll bounce off the wall and then go into the water on the other side. This is actually a fun little coincidence because I actually preferred this fail state more. In a way, it's kind of like a minor version of this one, where it's still showing the player that after teleporting, red's still going to hit a wall. Now, in this case, it goes to the water instead of doing an infinite bounce, but it still does sort of reinforce the behavior of the teleporter, which players are still learning at this point. So that's the puzzle. This is what made it into the game. So that small change fixed this very subtle issue that I, as a designer, really had no way to anticipate. And this is something that happens all the time in puzzle design. You have to play test your puzzles. Ideally have players talking about their thought process through their solving your puzzles to see what they're thinking, because chances are they're going to come up with some really creative wrong ideas that you need to get them away from somehow. Anyway, that's it for me. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.